The Oregon coast is one of the top places to retire in Oregon, and we get a lot of people that want to retire on the Oregon coast calling us. In this video, we're going to talk to you about everything that you need to know if you're one of those people that are thinking about retiring on the Oregon coast. All that starts now.
Hey, what's up everybody? This is Paul and Seth with the Home Team Brokers coming to you from the Oregon coast. And if this is your first time to the channel living on the Oregon coast and you want to get more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button and tap the little bell to get notified every time we drop a new video. We've helped so many people relocate to the Oregon coast, and as real estate professionals, we love to help with that process. So if that's you, give us a call, send us a text, shoot us an email, or click the link down below in the description of the video to schedule a Zoom call with us. Either way, we would love to help with your move to the Oregon coast.
All right, Paul, so first thing on our list, the first thing we want to talk about, one of the most common things that we get asked about is, I need to be near a hospital. So talk to us a little bit about where the hospitals are at on the Oregon coast.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are pleasantly surprised when they come to find that there are a lot of hospitals on the Oregon coast. And you know, because these are smaller towns, and typically in smaller towns, more rural areas, there isn't as good of access to healthcare. So from the northern coast to the central coast down to the southern coast, there are a lot of hospitals in each region. Another thing too is, in a lot of the smaller towns, even towns with hundreds of people or just over 1,000 people, there are small medical offices as well. So it's not going to be the case where if you have, you know, routine medical issues, or, you know, things that you need to be seen for, that you would have to drive, you know, 30 or 45 minutes necessarily to get to a hospital. I think the access overall is pretty good.
Yeah, I think every little town is going to have clinics, but as far as like the major hospitals, there's about a half a dozen. It's 7 to be exact. Astoria, Seaside, Lincoln City, Tillamook, Newport, Florence, North Bend, which is Coos Bay, and then Gold Beach down south. And one of the great things about all the hospitals that you'll find along the Oregon coast, most people don't want to be more than 15 or 30 minutes away from a major hospital. And on the Oregon coast, with those 7 hospitals, they're actually pretty evenly spread out amongst the coast. So you're actually really not typically going to be more than 30 minutes from any major hospital, regardless of what town you're in. In fact, it's going to be pretty hard to get beyond 30 minutes away from a major hospital on the Oregon coast.
Yeah, there's not too much development just inland from some of these coastal towns, but in some of these towns there are opportunities to get up into some elevation. For example, you can get a little bit out of town where it might be a little bit longer of a drive to get out of your immediate area to then get to the highway to then get to a hospital. But like Seth said, it's going to be pretty hard to be really too far from a hospital in particular, and more likely than not, you know, the nearest town next to you in a shorter drive, you know, maybe 10 or 15 minutes, you will be able to find some medical services.
Yeah, so pretty much anywhere you live on the Oregon coast, you're going to be covered. But if you have questions about that, maybe kind of where the perfect fit for you is based on your medical circumstances, get in touch with us and we can dig into a little bit more with you.
Absolutely. All right, next on the list we have things to do at the Oregon coast, which is obviously a big, broad category, but so many people are coming to the Oregon coast for a very particular lifestyle that tends to be a laid-back lifestyle, but a lot of people like to get outdoors and enjoy a lot of the activities that you can do at the Oregon coast. Go to the beach, do some beach combing, but also get up into the hills, do some hiking, get into the water, really everything in between. So I think there's going to be things to do for really anybody at the Oregon coast looking for a particular lifestyle that a coastal community could offer.
If you're going to retire, you're going to have some stuff to do, right?
Yeah, no doubt.
So obviously Oregon nature is a you know, a big reason why a lot of people are attracted to Oregon, and the coast obviously is no exception. There's going to be plenty of hiking and biking trails. Beaches might vary a little bit. There's going to be some beaches that are better than others, some that are a little bit more walkable than others. You know, if you want to be able to walk for like 2 miles, if you're a beachcomber, there might be certain places that are better than the others, but for the most part, you're going to have hiking, biking, you know, walking, just about anything you can imagine in outdoors or doing outdoors along the Oregon coast. There's state parks and parks all up and down the Oregon coast. If you look at a map, it's hard not to bump into one as you're driving up and down the Oregon coast. So no shortage of things to do outside. There's a handful of festivals that take place along the Oregon coast too. Most towns have at least a couple of festivals, oftentimes in the summertime. One of the bigger festivals along the Oregon coast is in Newport. It takes place in February, actually, in this case in the wintertime, which is the Newport Wine and Seafood Fest. So there's probably going to be no shortage of things to do along the Oregon coast, but you will probably find more things to do, maybe more events central to the northern Oregon coast. It is a little bit quieter on the southern Oregon coast. So if you're somebody that's constantly looking for things to do, there might be some things that are better, might be some places that are better than others for you based on those particular things. But again, kind of get with us on that if you have specific questions about it.
Yeah, things like dining in particular, bars and restaurants, a lot of things that attract the tourism outside of, you know, the beach and the ocean and the nature. A lot of that's going to be found, at least in higher volume, on the northern Oregon coast and on the central Oregon coast to some degree as well. So if you want to be around more people that are coming in and out, there are areas that are a little more transient as far as people coming in for the weekend, people coming in for the week on vacation. So there's some areas where you can get more of that, some areas where you're not going to get as much. I think another thing too is, you know, since something we talk about a lot in these videos is that these are all really pretty small towns, so there's going to be opportunities to get involved in the communities, different clubs and things like that, you know, maybe, you know, local nonprofits that support, you know, people who are in need, to different conservation clubs, things like that, people cleaning up the beach, you know, you name it. So there's definitely going to be a lot of things that you can get involved in these local communities as well.
Yeah, the communities are, you know, the towns are very community driven. So a lot of opportunity to get involved with local communities. I think another thing too to point out, if you're looking to meet people, kind of like Paul was saying, it really will vary, mostly the central to the northern Oregon coast. If you're looking to kind of find places that are maybe a little bit more bustling, vibrant, meeting people, it's a little bit quieter down on the southern Oregon coast. If you're looking for that quieter and you're not looking to be around as many people, that might be the right place for you. You want to meet people maybe somewhere central to northern Oregon coast, but there's going to be no shortage of things to do.
Yeah, then again, in that same breath, Coos Bay, North Bend is, you know, the most populated area on the Oregon coast, on the southern Oregon coast. So there's a lot more people there, and it does feel a little more bustling there, but probably more on a localized level than with, you know, as high a volume as tourists coming in. Brookings and Harbor as well. You know, this is an area with 10 to 15,000 people. So, you know, these aren't the smallest towns in the world. And, you know, there's definitely going to be, you know, social things to engage in too.
All right, how about one of the most common, you know, topics, the weather?
Yeah, we get asked about the weather a lot.
Yeah, so the weather on the Oregon coast, you know, the people that reach out to us are usually kind of fall into two different groups. One group of people looking to escape the heat, people usually coming from places like California and Arizona. And then the other group of people sort of looking for some more temperate weather, mostly like central to the southern Oregon coast, especially Brookings. Brookings actually is one of the most temperate places in the entire state of Oregon. It's known as the banana belt. It has a banana belt. There's something called the Chetco effect that streams warm air from California that keeps Brookings significantly warmer than some of the other surrounding areas. You also have in Brookings I think it's about 120 more days of sunny days, as opposed to like all the way on the northern Oregon coast, like in Astoria. So if you're looking for a little bit more warmth, a little bit more sun, less overcast, a lot of Oregonians kind of look to that central or that southern Oregon coast and Brookings. If you're somebody that's looking to escape the heat, somebody coming from Arizona, you might be anywhere on the Oregon coast, but central to the northern Oregon coast might be preferable for you.
Yeah, I mean, I think bottom line, the weather is going to be more mild than most anywhere that people are coming from. And for example, just a week or two ago, I was in Toledo, and I was coming from the valley in Oregon, so Western Oregon, and it was about 30, 35 degrees there in Toledo, and then into Newport by mid-afternoon, it was 50 degrees and sunny. You know, I had to take my coat off, it felt warm. And we're talking, you know, early winter here. And a month ago too, the same story. I went down to North Bend for an inspection, and really cold in the valley. Down there it was about 55 degrees, sunny, felt really warm, really nice day. So even in some of the colder months, I mean, you can get cold spells coming in just like anywhere else, but you're going to get weather that is typically pretty mild when it comes to the cold, you know, maybe mid 40s. In terms of an average temperature in the colder times of years, but you can get days that are 55, 60 degrees in December or January.
Yeah, you can get nice days year round.
Yeah.
I mean, there's nice days on the Oregon coast in December, in January, and February. Mostly 40 to 60 degrees, I mean, throughout the year.
Yeah.
You don't get a ton of days in the 70s. You get some, you get a few in the 80s here and there. I think we touched 90 at one point in September this year. Mm-hmm. Yeah, if I recall correctly, but that's uncommon. Maybe it feels like that's a little bit more common. We actually had a really long kind of, I don't know if you call it an Indian summer this year, but summer on the Oregon coast kind of went up until like mid-October. It wasn't until mid-October that it started kind of getting consistently rainy. I think we had like something like 47 days of no rain or something like that. Usually it's kind of more like early to mid-September when the rain starts. And then as far as lows, not a ton of freezing. You get a little freezing. You might get some places on the northern Oregon coast that might get snow for a day. It's usually not going to stick. It's just not cold enough, you know. So the snow might come down, stick for maybe an hour or something, and then melt. So overall, like a lot of 40s to 60s, and you can get a little bit more consistent warmth if you go down south, but usually not too cold and not too hot, which, you know, makes it appealing for a wide group of people. Yeah,
we hear a lot of people coming from more high desert climates with really dry air that love the Oregon coast weather. That's a big part of what's bringing them to the area. It's easier to breathe. Another thing too, that's maybe a little bit of a wild card, is you can get some pretty stormy weather. You can get high winds. In fact, the Oregon coast tends to be pretty windy year round. And it's not something that, you know, is going to be a factor, you know, every day, all day necessarily, but you can get really high winds that not only is going to impact your day-to-day necessarily at times, but also your home, of course, in terms of potential damage. You know, if you got patio furniture outside, or, you know, things flying around, trees overhead, I mean, all of those things could potentially be concerns. But the wind is, you know, where in some areas it's going to be more prevalent, high winds or just consistent winds, and in some areas it's not going to be as bad.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily town to town. It's more like neighborhood to neighborhood. It could be house to house, as far as just where your house is, you know, situated at. You know, do you have trees that are shielding the house, or a hill, or, you know, whatever it may be. So if you ask somebody, or maybe look this up online, you might find varying opinions about the wind. You might see some people that say that the wind is really bad. You might see somebody that says, you know, that might live near that person that says the wind really isn't that bad.
Yeah.
So it really varies from property to property, but definitely the furniture, the powdery furniture, leaving stuff outside, it can get windy enough to like knock, you know, we've had an umbrella, a pretty heavy duty like umbrella, and like a Costco outdoor furniture set, with, you know, one of those umbrellas that goes to the table, and like heavy, sturdy, heavy duty chairs. Wind blew that over. You know, so, and I wouldn't say the frequency is that high. It's not like it's windy all the time. It's just that you do get some days that it is really windy, and some areas are just worse than others. So might be something to consider, might be something to look out for, might not be something that's ever an issue or you really ever notice. Now, if you're walking along the beach, of course, and you don't have anything to obstruct that wind, it's always going to be windy regardless of what town you're in. But as far as each individual property and where you live, and if that house actually experiences a lot of wind and things that can cause damage to it, it's really going to vary from kind of like I'm saying, property to property or neighborhood to neighborhood, more so than from town to town.
Yeah, I think overall a lot of people are moving to the Oregon coast in part because of the milder weather. Like Seth said, you're living between 40 and 60 degrees for the majority of the year. You can get hotter than that. You're not going to get much colder than that. Too often. There are some anomalies, of course, some years. But I think one of the things that we, typically will try to impart on people who maybe haven't spent that much time at the Oregon coast in particular is, don't underestimate the gloominess and the long stretches of overcast and rain, and not necessarily the cold. It's not super cold, but it can be a little gloomy at times. And so if you're coming from a climate that is sunny all the time, just be prepared. Could be a little bit of a shock.
Yeah, I would say that's probably one of the toughest things about the Oregon coast. Same with really a lot of other parts of Oregon, like
Sure.
Portland, for example, right? Is you do catch some strings of like 4, 5, 6, 7 days where it's overcast, and it's never like pouring down rain, but it's like drizzly when you wake up in the morning. If you leave stuff outside, it's pretty wet, especially if you're really close to the ocean where the humidity is going to be higher. So I think that's probably one of the biggest things that people need to prepare for if they're not, is just you are going to have some streaks throughout the winter, maybe the fall time, maybe the springtime a little bit, where you don't see the sun for a fair amount of time, like a week or so. But other than that, I think the weather is pretty good.
Yep.
All right, so next on our list, one of the things that we commonly get asked about is retirement communities. So what do people need to know if they're thinking about a retirement community?
Well, I think the biggest thing with the Oregon coast is that there's not a lot of 55 plus communities. There's definitely no large scale retirement communities like what you would maybe think of or picture when you think of retirement 55 plus living. There are a handful of areas, maybe a dozen to a couple dozen at most, communities that have 50, 60 homes, something like that. Mm-hmm. A lot of these areas, in fact, the majority of these areas have manufactured homes. And some of these are communities with manufactured homes on real property. So you own the lot, you own the structure, and you own everything just like a typical property or home that you would own. And
different from a property that's mobile, can be moved on land that you don't own, that you're renting, also known as a mobile home park.
Right, and some of these are actually parks, and there's probably a pretty big range as far as the stereotype of what you would consider when you think of mobile home park, and then there's some that might break the mold a little bit, potentially. But I think the biggest point here is, and it is something we get asked about a lot, is that there's not a ton of opportunities or options when it comes to real true retirement communities. Now there are a lot of areas that have communities that really live like a 55 plus community.
Yeah.
Some that are manufactured, some that aren't necessarily all manufactured.
Yeah.
So there are going to be options. And bottom line too, I think that you look at the Oregon coast, you look at so many of these towns being smaller towns, being quieter and a little more laid back, a little more private, you're going to be able to find communities that fit, I think, a lot of the attributes of a 55 plus community, right, without having that designation.
Yeah, not technically 55 plus, but may as well be. If you do want to be in one of those places, though, you can find them from the northern Oregon coast, from Warrenton all the way down to Brookings. And sometimes we do get people asking us about manufactured homes that have never considered a manufactured home, or maybe kind of had that stigma of like a mobile home park. I'm not going to live in a property like that. But then they see on the Oregon coast, there's some homes that are manufactured that maybe you can't really tell they're manufactured. They look like a single family home. And then also there's some of these homes are in nice areas. Mm-hmm. They're on nice lots. They have water views, or they're close to the water. A lot of them are actually gated too. Mm-hmm. I don't know how common that is in other states to have like gated manufactured communities. But there's a fair amount of it on the Oregon coast. As far as single family home communities that are 55 plus, not a ton of that.
Yeah.
I looked before we left, and it's kind of hard to, there's a couple of different MLSs on the Oregon coast. It's kind of hard to look at the entire Oregon coast, but all I saw was just one home currently, which is in Brookings, that's currently on the market, that's in a dedicated 55 plus community. So if you want it, it can be found. It's not very common. But a lot of people tend to find that the neighborhood that they want kind of already, kind of like you're saying, kind of already works as a 55 plus community.
Absolutely. So another thing we get asked about a lot is proximity to an airport. And a lot of people relocating to the Oregon coast for retirement, or if they're, if they're not of retirement age, regardless, really want to be near an airport or have an airport that is at least somewhat accessible, because a lot of folks are moving in from out of state. They want to maybe go back home and visit family or things like that, or they're traveling, for leisure, for fun, for entertainment, that sort of thing. And so depending on where you live on the Oregon coast, it's either going to be pretty convenient to get to an airport and fly out to just about anywhere you would want to go, kind of ranging from that to all the way to very inconvenient. You're talking an hour's drive, several hours drive one way to get to an airport.
Yeah, I think, so good news with the hospitals, you're going to be close to a hospital pretty much regardless. For the most part, bad news with the airports. Our international airports in Oregon are in Portland, and Portland's hour and a half, 2 hours in some places from the northern Oregon coast. There's an international airport in North Medford. Now, if you look at a map, North Medford doesn't look that far from the Oregon coast, but there's no straight shot. You have to go down through California or up north, it's like maybe 3 hours to get from North Medford to like a Brookings,
right.
Something like that. So I think for whatever reason, the magic number for hospitals is like, I don't want to be any more than 30 minutes from a hospital. And people usually say with airports, they usually put that cutoff at like an hour, hour and a half. They usually say, I want to be about an hour and a half away from a hospital, or from an airport rather. In a lot of cases, you're probably not, you're going to have to bite the bullet. You're not going to be an hour and a half away from an international airport. Your regional airports we have in Eugene, which Eugene just going to be due east of Florence. And then in the North Bend, Coos Bay area also have a regional airport. So only one actually on the coast in North Bend, one kind of close to the coast in Eugene, both regional. The other two international, pretty far away from a lot of places on the Oregon coast. So probably not gonna matter too much where you're at. You're probably gonna be away from an airport. Pretty much every bigger city along the Oregon coast does have a municipal airport.
Yeah.
Local municipal airports for things like emergency, Coast Guard training, and then chartered private flights. So maybe if you're a pilot, or if you do want to charter a private flight, you can fly into a lot of these other towns, that most of these towns that don't have airports. But for the most part, flying regionally or internationally, or you need an international airport, probably just going to have to bite the bullet a little bit and plan on maybe driving a couple hours. It might even be a little bit more.
Yeah, I think with Eugene, you'll be able to probably get to just about anywhere you would want to get to, because it does service flights to and from a lot of different cities regionally. So if you wanted to fly to New York, you might have to fly from Eugene to Portland to New York, or Eugene to Boise, then to New York, or something like that. So there's going to be options to be able to go from Eugene, transfer flight somewhere else, and then continue to on your journey. When you look at the airport that's in North Bend, that's only servicing flights to Denver and San Francisco. So your options are much more limited, and the flights are a lot more expensive too. So that's something to take into consideration.
Yeah. All right, next, one of the important things people want to know, cost of living. What is some of the costs going to look like?
Yeah, the Oregon coast overall has a relatively low cost of living compared to national averages. I think there are some areas where you're going to maybe be surprised with some of the costs, I would think. Definitely, say Oregon, all of the West Coast specifically, is going to be higher than the rest of the country when it comes to national averages for cost of living, from housing to groceries and healthcare and down the line.
What are you, like 11th or something like that?
Yeah, depending on the category. But when you look at the Oregon coast, you could definitely get more affordable costs of living compared to other parts of Oregon, like Portland, for example. But that's not true with all categories. So I think the biggest thing that people are looking at, one, property taxes. You're looking at roughly for every county about 1%, and that's 1% roughly of your assessed. That's a whole nother topic. We can talk to you about property taxes. The lowest property taxes are going to be in Curry County,
which is down south.
Lowest in the state.
Lowest in the state, right?
Yeah.
Brookings, Gold Beach, yeah, which I think it's like 0.66, 0.67, something like that. Other than that, your housing obviously is going to be the biggest factor, and the housing is really going to vary. Most expensive housing is mostly going to be on the northern Oregon coast, and your probably least expensive housing is going to be around Coos County, Coos Bay, North Bend, and probably Reedsport, something like that is probably going to be the most inexpensive. And there's going to be a pretty big gap between like Coos Bay and like a Cannon Beach in Clatsop County on the northern Oregon coast. I think average home values in Coos Bay like mid threes. Cannon Beach, the most expensive place on the Oregon coast, more like probably like mid eights.
Yeah.
So your utilities, all that kind of stuff, groceries, day to day, not going to vary too much. You do have better shopping, probably going to find some better prices, maybe a little bit on the northern Oregon coast with having things like a Fred Meyer, Costco, Walmart, stuff like that. When you're on the southern Oregon coast, you don't have as many big box stores. Same is true with your grocery stores too. A lot of small, like K's and McKay's. That's just kind of a local mom and pop grocery store chain. So your food costs might be a little bit higher. Obviously depends on where you're coming from. Get a lot of people that are coming from California. Most people coming from California, from what they say, the cost of living obviously across the board is less
Much
here.
lower.
Yeah. So if you're coming from the Midwest, probably going to be a little bit higher. If you're coming from somewhere a little expensive like California, you're going to find it's going to be lower.
Yeah. And just to touch on some of what Seth was saying as far as housing costs, I think a lot of people are a little bit surprised when they start a home search and really start digging into what they can get for their budget. But there's a really big range, like Seth was saying as well. So there are towns that are beachfront, more resort style communities where the property values are going to be really elevated because you not only have local residents, you have vacation rental properties, you have property management companies or investors that invest in these communities, and a lot of nice high-end luxury real estate to cater to people traveling to these areas on vacation. You also have second homes, vacation homes, people who are buying second homes in these communities.
Yeah.
Whereas there's other communities on the Oregon coast that are a little bit larger, so you still have that, but not. There's more local residents too, so there's more real estate overall. There's more housing, more inventory that can keep prices, a little bit more reasonable. And then there's some communities that are going to be, much lower than the median sale price overall, where your dollar can go a lot further. But when you look at a lot of the Oregon coast compared to, say, Portland, for example, there are definitely going to be towns and regions that are on par with Portland when you look at median sale price, and in some cases, a little bit more expensive. However, there's going to be communities where you can get things that are well below that median sale price. So I guess that's why, connecting with us and really digging into your budget and your timeline, your home search, your needs, your wants, all of that, we can point you in the right direction so we can get you the best idea in terms of what you can get for your dollar and where is going to be the best area to focus on.
Yeah, and I think especially for you Oregonians that have maybe lived here your whole life, you're familiar with the Oregon coast, kind of like Paul and I, both lived here our entire lives. You might be a little bit surprised if you haven't looked at home prices in the past 3 years, 5 years, 10 years now. Home prices have gone up everywhere, but there's a couple other things working along the Oregon coast. If you kind of remember the Oregon coast from, say, 20 years ago, it didn't feel as popular. A lot of the towns kind of had a little bit more of a depressed feeling to them, didn't have super strong local economies. But with the coast becoming more and more popular, driving more people there, and then kind of with the popularity of vacation homes, second homes, the Airbnbs, the VRBOs, that's really driven up the popularity of the Oregon Coast and the Oregon Coast real estate, and really driven up home values. So like Paul's saying, in some cases, home values on the Oregon Coast have gone up even more so than in some places of Portland. So if you're an Oregonian, you haven't looked at home prices on the Oregon Coast in a while, you might be a little bit surprised. But there are some deals out there to be found for sure, and that's the reason you want to get with Paul and I, and we can find those for you. All right, the next thing that we get asked about, and you know, that people come to us for advice, is choosing the right property. How do you choose the right property? How do you go about it? How do you kind of figure out what the right property is for you? And we get this too from a lot of people that have only been here once, or that email that we got last night, the person from LA said he's only been here once before.
Yeah.
You know, some people have never been here.
Yeah.
It definitely helps if you come here and experience it before you really start thinking about moving here. But a lot of people aren't necessarily sure exactly what type of property they want, or exactly where they want that property. So how do people go about choosing the right property?
Yeah, I mean, there's a pretty unique set of considerations if you're just looking at the Oregon coast as a potential place to move. We're talking 363 miles of coastline, very, very small towns to pretty small towns, but still, you know, some towns of 10,000 plus people, and then in Coos Bay, North Bend, 25,000 people. So you do get a pretty good range, but there are a ton of options. So there's a lot of consistency from all the way up north in Astoria, all the way down south to Brookings, in that you have the natural beauty, you have the ocean, you have the beaches, you have a lot of the small town charm with the shopping, antique shops and galleries and great little local restaurants and things like that. But really the best place to start is considering your lifestyle and your budget, of course, and what areas, you know, or what type of area you could see yourself living in. So there's most likely going to be a lot of towns that could potentially check the boxes. And I think people who are willing to go into it with that mindset of saying, okay, I could end up in one of maybe a half a dozen different towns, just depending on where we find the right property. Going into it with that strategy typically gives people the best opportunity to find the right house. Whereas, you know, the town obviously is important. Again, you could be in one town and get the exact same experience in another town, and you're going to have a town about 30 minutes north of you, about 30 minutes south of you. So we want to be able to have a conversation about, okay, what are the priorities for you in a house, in a town, in an area, lifestyle, again, all those things, budget, of course, and then from there, set up a home search, start looking at opportunities, start seeing things that look interesting, and then it breaks out from there. Okay, this house looks interesting because of XYZ, let's focus on this. Or, you know, now that we kind of have seen the inventory and seen what's out there, we want to adjust the criteria a little bit. So we want to start with casting as wide a net as possible and start working our way down from there.
Yeah, I think this is probably, this is where people that are kind of just starting out, that aren't maybe sure, are going to struggle the most, and that's where Paul and I really are going to come in the most, is narrowing this down for you. Two things that people often kind of struggle with, they'll either want to be in a particular town, and then it's just a matter of finding a particular property, but figuring out what town that is, what town has the right feel or what vibe for them, has all the amenities, close enough to shopping, close enough to whatever they want to do. So narrowing down the town. Then the other bucket of people is narrowing down the property. They have a specific type of property that they want, whether that property has water views, or you're walkable to the beach, or, you know, proximity to whatever amenities that you want. In which case, usually if you're looking for a very specific property that there's not a ton of inventory for, usually, like Paul's saying, you're going to want to be more open about the town that you're in. So some people are a little bit more property shopping. Some people kind of start by town shopping, figuring out where the right town is, and then they find the property from there. And that's kind of like the biggest challenge, and that's really where Paul and I will kind of come in to help you narrow down what's going to be the best fit for you.
Yeah, and if you want to have that conversation, I mean, send us a text, shoot us an email, give us a call, or there's a link down in the description of the video, and we can schedule a video call so we can actually get face-to-face, even if it's virtually or digitally, and have this conversation, start looking at your priorities, and we can talk about what areas, you know, might be best to focus on even from the outset, and then, you know, start adding in or tweaking criteria as we move along.
All right, next on the list.
So next we're going to talk about crime. This is something we do get asked about a lot. It doesn't necessarily seem to be that big of a concern for most people, because I think a lot of people moving to the Oregon coast understand that these are small towns that are all, for the most part, relatively safe.
Yeah.
But crime exists everywhere, right?
You're right, yeah. And I think if you're just searching online, I don't know that you're going to get kind of the most accurate representation of what the crime is like along the Oregon coast. It's going to vary a little bit from town to town. Some places are going to be virtually almost non-existent to some of the more populous places like Coos Bay or Lincoln City. Crime might be a little bit higher, but the biggest thing, and people point this out to us as well, is it's going to be subjective, and it's going to depend on where you're coming from. So if you're coming from a place that is higher crime, it's definitely going to feel low crime. Like, for example, we had somebody comment on a video just the other day saying that they had moved from Portland to Coos Bay, and saying that it feels like it's relatively crime-free in Coos Bay compared to Portland. That's what they were used to, is Portland. But at the same time, we have people that live in Coos Bay that complain about the crime, and they say the crime is high. So it just depends on what you're contrasting or comparing to. A lot of people that move here that share their experience with us. Again, a lot of people coming from like California, they feel like the crime is less. They feel safer. I would just say anecdotally, like, set aside any kind of numbers that you're reading about online. Just anecdotally spending time along the Oregon coast, and Paul and I have spent time, from Brookings to Astoria, quite a bit of time in a lot of these little towns. The crime, you don't ever feel unsafe. It doesn't feel high. You don't hear about a lot of crimes. You might read about some places, like I'm thinking like Lincoln City or Seaside, where crime actually rates higher, or oftentimes these websites, what they'll do is they'll give it a grade, and what kind of metrics they use to come up with that grade, who knows? So you kind of got to take it with a grain of salt. Lincoln City and Seaside don't have great grades, but you and I have been going to Lincoln City and Seaside our whole life, and I mean, I definitely, I feel safer in Lincoln City than some other places or around Oregon, specifically probably Portland, for example. So it's all relative. As a whole, crime is very low on the Oregon coast. The crime that does exist, a lot of it's property crime, so you don't hear about people getting murdered along the Oregon coast. There might be a couple a year, for the entire, a couple dozen towns that there are. But each individual town, if you look at, crime stats, usually that number is like 0 for every town.
Yeah.
So not a ton of violent crime. It's usually kind of the bigger towns that are usually maybe struggling a little bit more with like drugs, like methamphetamines, and people breaking into stuff is kind of like the biggest thing that you, and that's just more about what you read about online. Me personally, knowing people that live on the coast, spend time on the coast, I don't hear about it that much. We had a client that came here from Texas a couple months ago. It was their first time coming to Portland. They had a U-Haul. They parked it at their hotel. It got broken into the first night they were here. Yeah. That stuff doesn't happen on the Oregon coast. It just doesn't.
Yeah. It's all relative, like Seth is saying, and I think it's important for us to add some context to this, but again, it's going to depend on where people are coming from, what they're used to, what their expectations are. I don't think there's a town on the Oregon coast where many people really feel unsafe at all. There's going to be some towns that are a little bit larger where you see things like homelessness, for example, and sometimes homelessness can equal crime. Not always the case, obviously. Everybody's circumstance is different. But I think point being is anybody moving to the Oregon coast, considering moving to the Oregon coast, there's not really just one town or a couple of towns that we would say, hey, anywhere else is okay, but this this place is an area where you're going to feel unsafe and you're going to be in constant danger. It's not that, really to any extent at all, and
not even close, really.
Yeah,
I mean, there's nowhere I can think of that I wouldn't, that I would tell my, like my own mother not to move to.
Yeah, or something, sure, right. You see a lot of things online, especially coming from local residents of some towns on the Oregon coast, where they're saying, this place is completely fallen apart, crime has run rampant, all of that. And I think in some areas, maybe that have experienced a little higher population growth than others, whatever it may be, where you have seen an uptick in crime, whatever that uptick may be, their perspective from 20, 25 years ago, 50 years ago, where it is today, maybe there is a little bit more crime, and from their perspective, crime is just running rampant and things are out of control and the city's burning to the ground. Where again, especially outside looking in, when you evaluate all these different towns, It's just not really going to be the case.
Yeah. And keep in mind, you know, a lot of people are living in these towns are people that have second homes, or these are people that are vacationing. You know, not exactly the type of demographic that's going to be like, you know, the highest crime type of demographic. So it makes sense that the Oregon coast is a pretty low crime, pretty safe place.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, now one of the last things that people sometimes will ask about, that you kind of want to know about if you're moving to the Oregon coast, is what's the tax situation? Am I going to get taxed on Social Security or pension, or kind of what does that look like for retirees?
What does it look like?
Well, you don't get taxed on Social Security. I know that some states you do. They do tax your pension. And some of those taxes, that's going to be based on your age, and then, you know, what that number is. Beyond that, there is some assistance for people that are 65 and above on property taxes that you can apply for.
Yeah, so if you qualify, there's a tax deferral program for seniors. I think it starts at 62, I believe, in Oregon, and there's quite a long list of requirements or to qualify for the program, but you can defer property taxes. I think the biggest one is if your household income is under $51,000.
Yeah, okay. So I hope that helps. I hope that gives you a greater picture of what you need to know and answers some of your questions about moving to and living on the Oregon coast. If this video helped you, give us a thumbs up, give us a like. It lets us know we're doing a good job. You can feel free to comment too. We'll reply to those comments. And if you want to see more videos about what it's like to live on the Oregon coast, make sure and hit the subscribe button and tap the bell. That way you'll be notified every time we release a new video, which is every single week. And if you're somebody that's thinking about taking the next steps, you can call us, text us, email us, or you can click that link below, click the little more button of this video on YouTube to access the description, and you'll find a link to get into our calendar to schedule a Zoom call with us. That's typically a good place to start if you're really serious thinking about moving here and you want to meet us.
Yeah, absolutely. We really appreciate you watching. Until next time, we'll talk to you later.
Take care.